Mossley, Tameside, the night of the 2nd of July, 2022. On a quiet street in a modest home, 38-year-old Thomas Campbell returns from a night out. He pulls into his drive. The engine cuts. He opens the car door. That's when 3 men step out from the shadows. They've been waiting for hours, watching, tracking his every move for a week. They know his habits, his weak spots, everything. They drag him from the car and force him inside his own house. What happens next lasts nearly 2 hours. He's beaten, stabbed, strangled, and scalded with boiling water. When it's over, his body shows 61 separate injuries. It's one of the most savage murders Greater Manchester police have ever seen, so brutal that even experienced detectives struggled to put it into words. The man behind it all was John Belfield, jealous, greedy, and consumed by a twisted mix of obsession and ambition. His target wasn't just any man. Thomas Campbell was the head of a Manchester crime family moving millions of pounds worth of cocaine across North Manchester and Tameside. This is the story of the Campbell crime family, from the brutal murder of Thomas Campbell to the collapse of everything they built. It's a story of betrayal, of family loyalty twisted into crime, and of a drug empire that kept running even after its leader was gone. But at the heart of it all lies a disturbing paradox. Thomas Campbell ran a sophisticated cocaine network. He had money, contacts, and protection. Yet he was killed inside his own home by men who knew exactly where to find him, when he'd be alone, and how to get past his defenses. They knew because someone close to him, someone who should have protected him, had turned against him. His ex-wife had sold him out. To understand why Thomas Campbell had to die, you have to understand the warped mind of John Belfield. He was 31 in 2022, jealous, angry, and obsessed. His ex-partner, Demi Lee Driver, had started seeing Thomas Campbell not long after leaving him. To Belfield, that was unforgivable. Thomas wasn't just a rival in love. He was a criminal with hidden stashes of cocaine and cash. Belfield saw a way to settle every score at once, kill his rival, rob him blind, and take revenge in one strike. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed inside information, details of Thomas's daily routine, his weak spots, his exact location. And unbelievably, he got that help from Colleen Campbell, Thomas's ex-wife. Colleen and Thomas had divorced in 2019 after a decade of marriage. Whatever anger remained between them, it turned deadly. She passed on details of his movements, confirmed his address, and even used their teenage daughter to help identify the house, a mother turning her own child into an unknowing accessory to her father's murder. For a week in late June and early July, Belfield's team carried out surveillance. They attached a tracker to Thomas's car, a small device that pinged his location in real time. They watched his house. They studied his habits. They learned exactly when he was home alone. And on the night of the 2nd of July, they struck. Belfield arrived with 2 men, 29-year-old Rhys Stephen and another man who's never been identified. They waited in the shadows outside his home. When Thomas pulled into his driveway, they pounced. The attack was fast and merciless. Thomas was dragged from his car into the house. For the next 2 hours, he was tortured, stabbed, strangled, and scalded with boiling liquid. It wasn't just murder, it was interrogation. They demanded to know where he kept his drugs and money, whether he talked, or whether they found anything. No one knows. But when they finally left, Thomas Campbell was dead, his body showing 61 separate injuries. Belfield and the others fled immediately. Within 2 days, Belfield had vanished from the UK. He boarded a flight to South America and hid in Suriname with a cousin already wanted by police. It was a calculated escape, proof that Belfield knew exactly what he'd done and had no intention of facing the consequences. But he'd misjudged one thing. He left behind people who would talk, evidence that would surface, and detectives who would stop at nothing to bring the whole network down. The investigation into Thomas Campbell's murder moved fast. Greater Manchester Police treated it for what it was, a calculated execution carried out with planning and precision. Detectives worked around the clock, speaking to witnesses, studying forensic evidence, and pulling apart phone records to map every movement of the suspects. They found the tracker fitted to Thomas's car. They traced the surveillance work, and, most damning of all, they uncovered Colleen Campbell's involvement, her calls and messages to Belfield, the information she passed on, and the moment she used her daughter to confirm Thomas's address. Every detail was logged. Every message was proof of betrayal. By 2023, the investigation had closed in. Colleen Campbell was arrested and charged, alongside 29-year-old Rhys Stephen and 38-year-old Stephen Cleworth, the man who helped plant the tracker but stayed away from the actual killing. All three faced trial. The verdicts were devastating. Colleen Campbell was found guilty of manslaughter and jailed for 13 years. Rhys Stephen was convicted of murder and conspiracy to rob, receiving life with a minimum of 37 years. Stephen Cleworth was convicted of manslaughter and given life with a minimum of 12 years. All three were also found guilty of plotting to rob Thomas Campbell. The prosecution's case clear that the motive had been both jealousy and greed. But the man who started it all was still missing. John Belfield was hiding somewhere in South America, relying on distance and contacts to keep him safe. Manchester police worked with international partners, tracking his movements and preparing extradition paperwork. Their patience paid off. In March 2023, Belfield was located in Suriname. He was arrested and, after months of legal wrangling, extradited to the UK in 2024 to face trial for murder.
You're under arrest for the following offences. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder, conspiracy to murder, manslaughter, conspiracy to rob, and conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. We'll just walk it out, please, yeah?
His trial began in Manchester in early 2025. Over 4 weeks, the court heard every detail of what had happened on that July night in 2022. Prosecutors laid out the evidence: the tracker, the surveillance footage, witness accounts, and forensic proof. Belfield's defense was laughable. He claimed he was at home watching Finding Nemo with family when the murder took place. The jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. In July 2025, the verdict came back: guilty of murder, guilty of conspiracy to rob. John Belfield was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Detective Sergeant Paul Davies, who led the investigation, spoke after the trial. He said justice had finally caught up with Belfield and praised the Campbell family for their strength and dignity throughout an ordeal that no family should ever endure. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because while detectives were still investigating Thomas Campbell's murder, while his killers were being hunted, charged, and tried, the Campbell crime network didn't stop. The drug trade Thomas had built carried on. It passed to his brother Lee Campbell. Lee was born in 1982. He was 40 when Thomas was killed, and instead of walking away after seeing what crime had done to his brother, he stepped straight into his place. By late 2022, Lee had become the new head of the Campbell organized crime group. Under his control, the gang continued to run a well-structured cocaine supply line across North Manchester and Tameside. They shifted large amounts of Class A drugs, made serious money, and kept the system running almost exactly as Thomas had left it. For more than 2 years, they moved kilos of cocaine, served addicts, and profited from misery. It shows something bleak about organized crime. A leader can be murdered. His killers can be caught and jailed. His family can sit through the trial and grieve. Yet the operation rolls on. The drugs still move. The money still comes in. New dealers replace the old. New customers fill the gaps. It's a self-sustaining machine powered by greed and demand. Lee Campbell understood that. He saw the structure was already in place, the contacts, the routes, the buyers, and so he took over like he was inheriting a business, not a criminal empire. But Lee made one fatal mistake. He underestimated Greater Manchester Police. By mid-2024, the City of Manchester North Challenger team had launched a covert operation into the Campbell network. Acting on tips and intelligence from the community, detectives identified a specific mobile number used as the gang's main drugs line, the number customers called to place orders. That was the crack in the system. As one officer later said, once they had the line, everything else began to fall apart. Through surveillance and phone tracing, police pieced together the structure of the group Lee Campbell, then 43, was the boss. Below him, 47-year-old Stephen Quinn handled street-level deals. Carlo Tomasello, 38, and Kelly Blundell, 37, helped run the operation, with Blundell's house used to bag and store cocaine ready for sale. Other members included Stephen Mark Salinger, Mark McGrath, 41, and Paul Taylor, 42, all acting as couriers or storekeepers for the network. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered the gang's hiding system. They had built secret drug stashes in local woodland, in places like Clayton Vale and Phillips Park in East Manchester. Officers watched Lee Campbell walking into the woods with a shovel, burying packages under cover of darkness. Each movement was logged. Each location was mapped. The evidence was building. In December 2024, police made their move. They dug up 16 hidden packages, along with 2 more kilos of cocaine buried separately. Everything was sealed in odor-proof containers and plastic wraps, some marked with a red star logo, the gang's own branding. The haul was worth around £95,600 on the street. It was clear proof of large-scale supply. Soon after, Lee Campbell was arrested, in circumstances that almost bordered on farce. Officers found him sitting in his living room, eating a mince pie and drinking tea when they burst through the door. No shootout, no chase, just a quiet arrest. Across the city, coordinated raids hit other addresses. At Paul Taylor's house, detectives found a dealer's ledger showing nearly £40,000 owed for drugs. Messages linked him to overseas contacts, hinting at an operation that stretched far beyond Manchester's streets. During the series of raids, police seized large quantities of cocaine, stacks of cash, and several mobile phones tied to the drug trade. In one safe house alone, officers recovered drugs worth about £85,680, packaged and ready for sale. By the end of December 2024, the Campbell drug empire was finished. Detectives estimated that, across the conspiracy, the gang had supplied at least 16 kilos of cocaine, valued at up to £1.6 million on the street. 7 suspects were charged with conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and related offences. All were remanded in custody while they awaited trial. The court process was quick. On the 7th of November 2025, at Manchester Crown Court, Lee Campbell and 6 others were sentenced after admitting their crimes. The punishments were heavy. Lee, as the ringleader, was jailed for 9 years and 4 months. Carlo Tomasello received 3 years and 8 months. Kelly Blundell got 2 years and 8 months. Stephen Quinn was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months. Mark McGrath and Paul Taylor each received 2 years and 8 months. One smaller player was given a suspended 2-year sentence with community service. Together, these sentences closed the book on a network that had flooded Manchester with cocaine for profit. After the hearing, Detective Inspector Claire Moss from the Challenger team spoke publicly. She said the unit remained determined to dismantle organised crime groups and that the sentences were proof that justice would always be delivered. The Campbell network, she explained, had made huge profits by exploiting vulnerable people and cared only for themselves. Moss also thanked the public for their help, reminding people that every bit of information matters, that even the smallest tip can lead to action. So what does this story reveal? It shows that organized crime adapts and survives, that when one leader falls, another often steps in. The market for drugs never disappears. It simply shifts to whoever is willing to take the risk. It also shows how betrayal corrodes everything it touches. Thomas Campbell's ex-wife betrayed him, using their own daughter as a pawn in his murder. And it shows that justice, even when slow, is steady and unforgiving. But the irony of the Campbell story is impossible to ignore. Thomas Campbell ran a professional operation. He had money, contacts, and the instincts to stay alive in a violent world. Yet he was killed in his own home, betrayed by someone closest to him. Lee Campbell took over the same business, believing he could outsmart the law. But his downfall began with a single phone number and the patient work of detectives. If these men were clever enough to run a £1 million cocaine network, why weren't they clever enough to protect themselves? The answer lies in arrogance, routine, and a false sense of invincibility. Thomas thought he was safe behind his own front door. He never imagined his ex-wife would hand him over to his enemies. Lee thought burying cocaine in the woods made him untouchable. He never realized the police were watching every move. Both brothers misjudged the people and the system around them. Both paid the price. What Greater Manchester Police achieved is remarkable. They solved a brutal torture murder that stretched across international borders, tracking every suspect and securing convictions. And while doing so, they also dismantled the victim's own criminal network, arresting his successor and every key player. It was a two-front fight, one against the men who killed Thomas, and another against the family empire he built. Both battles ended in convictions and justice. The human cost, though, is immense. Thomas Campbell, for all his crimes, was still a man, a father, a brother, a son, tortured to death in his own home. His children lost their father. His ex-wife, Colleen, will spend 13 years behind bars, knowing she helped orchestrate that horror. Lee Campbell will spend nearly a decade in prison, following his brother down the same path of destruction, and the addicts who bought from the Campbells, trapped in cycles of debt and dependency, remain victims of a trade built on pain. Has Manchester become safer? Has the drug problem eased? Probably not. The Campbell gang is gone, but the demand isn't. New dealers will step in, filling the void left behind. The cycle continues, because as long as there's money to be made, someone will take the risk. Still, what's the alternative? Should police have walked away? Should they have ignored the murders, the trafficking, the exploitation? Of course not. These crimes demanded a response, and the officers delivered one. Justice isn't perfect, but it matters. Every conviction proves that the system still works, that crime has consequences. This is the landscape of organized crime in modern Britain, an endless battle fought street by street, case by case. There are no final victories, only small hard-won moments where justice prevails. But each one counts. Every gang dismantled, every criminal jailed, every case solved. These are the wins that keep the balance. The story of the Campbell crime family will stay with both police and criminals. For investigators, it's proof that patience, persistence, and collaboration can bring down even the most entrenched networks. For those tempted by crime, it's a warning. Belfield fled to South America and was dragged back in chains. Lee buried cocaine in the woods while police quietly watched. Colleen thought betrayal would set her free and lost everything. The message is simple. No matter how clever you think you are, crime catches up with you, and justice will always find you, and still criminals will keep going. They'll study the Campbell case and convince themselves they can do it better. They'll think they can cover their tracks, hide their money, and avoid the mistakes that brought down Lee and Thomas. They'll see the £1.6 million in cocaine sales and decide the profit is worth the risk. They'll look at the demand for drugs and see opportunity, not devastation. It's a cycle that never really ends. A war fought one arrest, one case, one raid at a time. The scale of what the Campbells built is staggering. They distributed 16 kilos of cocaine worth over £1.5 million. They created hidden stashes in Woodland. They managed a customer base that owed £40,000 in unpaid drug debts. They operated across several boroughs, from North Manchester to Tameside, serving both addicts and recreational users. And they did all of this while Thomas Campbell's murder investigation was still unfolding. While the family attended court hearings for his killers, they kept dealing cocaine. It shows a level of compartmentalization that's cold and calculated, the ability to carry on with business while surrounded by grief and chaos. Think about Lee Campbell's mindset. His brother had been tortured to death. The killers were caught, tried, and sentenced. The family had lived through that horror. And still, Lee stepped in to keep the operation alive. What kind of person does that? It reveals the warped loyalty of organized crime, a world where profit always outweighs pain, and where criminality becomes identity. For people like Lee, drug dealing wasn't just work, it was who they were, and the damage spread far beyond the gang itself. The Campbells pumped cocaine into North Manchester and Tameside for years. They created addicts, they fueled violence. They left behind families torn apart by dependency and debt. That £40,000 ledger at Paul Taylor's home wasn't just numbers, it was a list of lives in chaos. People borrowing, stealing, and risking everything to repay criminals. Every kilo of cocaine they moved ruined dozens of lives, but the police response deserves credit. Identifying the drugs line was a masterstroke, the turning point of the investigation. Once they had that number, detectives could follow every call, every location, every buyer. It was smart, patient, methodical work. The kind of policing that dismantles networks rather than just arresting dealers. Watching Lee Campbell bury cocaine in the woods took restraint. The officers could have pounced early, but they waited, knowing a single arrest wouldn't be enough. They wanted to break the entire system, and they did. Yet this story isn't a simple case of good defeating evil. Thomas Campbell was a criminal, yes, but he was also a victim. He died in agony, betrayed by his ex-wife and murdered in his own home. His children lost their father. His killers acted out of greed and revenge, targeting him because of the life he'd chosen. His crime and his suffering are intertwined. Inseparable parts of the same truth. Lee Campbell's fate follows the same pattern. He's a convicted trafficker, but also a man who lost his brother to murder. And his answer to that trauma was to keep doing exactly what had destroyed his family. He had every chance to stop, to go straight, to honor Thomas's memory differently. Instead, he followed the same road and ended up behind bars. It's tragic, but it's also predictable. Look at the symmetry. The men who killed Thomas are in prison. The people who worked for Thomas are in prison. The man who replaced him is in prison. Every major player in the Campbell circle has either died or been jailed. What began as a powerful family operation ended as another example. Proof that this life only ever ends in one of two ways, a cell or a coffin. And still, the story goes on. Somewhere in Manchester right now, another gang is selling cocaine to the same customers the Campbells once served. Another man thinks he's smarter, more careful, less likely to get caught. Another woman is counting the cash. The machinery of the drug trade keeps turning. Demand creates supply. Supply brings profit. Profit breeds greed, and greed always leads back to violence. It's a loop that rarely breaks. The Campbells' downfall is a story without heroes. It's filled only with victims, perpetrators, and survivors. Justice was served, but the problem it represents remains. The drug trade hasn't stopped. It's just shifted hands. The police won this battle, but the war continues, one investigation at a time. The Campbell organized crime group has been destroyed. That matters. It's not everything, but it's something. A small victory in a fight that never really ends. In Britain's ongoing struggle against organized crime, sometimes that's all there is. One more gang gone. One more community a little safer. One more reminder that, for all its persistence, crime always carries a price.